A few days ago, I watched a video by Coastoons about the future of wooden coasters. In that video, Mr. Toons predicted that woodies would eventually die out due to lack of demand and more innovation in the steel industry. That got me thinking a little bit. Are we eventually going to see an end to wooden coasters? So in line with the nerd I am, I started to do a little bit of researching. Okay, a whole hell of a lot of researching, and I came across some pretty interesting stuff. And so yeah, I compiled it all into one video, and this is what I gathered on the future of wooden coasters. In order to understand why woodies could be dying off, let's take a brief look at their pros and cons when compared to steel. Wooden coasters provide an out-of-control feeling and a classic sensation to them, which is something that you don't feel on steel coasters as much. They're also pretty marketable for parks, especially since there aren't nearly as many woodies as there are steelies. I'm just going to sidetrack for a little bit because I found this article by Time about wooden coasters during my research for this video, and it's kind of hilarious, so here we go. According to this article, steely partisans love the corkscrews and loop-the-loops made possible by the bent pipe architecture. Woody fans, however, prefer the old-school clack-clack and the aesthetics of the entire structure. One of the good things about wooden coasters, according to this article, is that you are soaring into all of the wooden bracing and strut work, whilst on steelies, you're moving through open space, eliminating the illusion. Yeah. Anyway, back to the pros and cons. Woodies provide a special sensation that you can't really get anywhere else. However, the cons are much more plentiful. By nature, wooden coasters are harder to maintain for parks, and not enough maintenance leads to the ride becoming quite rough. Roughness and maintenance are a huge problem for parks because it might mean that they'd have to spend additional money to retract the coaster or do anything else necessary with it. Manufacturers also can't be quite as innovative with wood as they can with steel, so all that being said, it appears that steel is a much better option for building new rides. Next, I'm going to start this off by saying that to me, it seems like the number of wooden coasters being built have decreased significantly decade after decade. There seems to be many more classic woodies operating than modern ones, and there's probably also a ton of old ones that have already been removed. So I looked into that a bit and came up with this graph. Here, the y-axis shows the percentage of coasters made in a certain decade that were wooden, and the x-axis specifies the decades. God, I feel like I'm a math teacher. Anyway, you can clearly see a downward trend of wooden coasters being made. I'm going to add that all of this data was collected from RCDB, and the further back you go, the less specific records about new coasters being built are. As a result, I'm not sure if all of this is 100% correct, but it's probably pretty accurate. Anyway, back in ancient times, most of coasters produced were made of wood. From 1920 to 1960, approximately 60% of coasters added were wooden. This decreased drastically to 20% in the 1960s and kept getting smaller decade after decade. In the 2010s, only 1.4% of coasters built were wooden. Today, there are 5,577 roller coasters in the world, with 184 woodies among them. This equates to only 4% of coasters currently operating being wood, a significantly smaller margin than I'd previously thought. And just like we saw with the graph, the percentage is getting smaller and smaller every year. So for the past minute or two, I've just been throwing a bunch of numbers at you, and I'm sorry for that. This is a YouTube video, not a math class. To sum it all up, though, there's a big downward trend in the production of wooden coasters. New woodies are becoming rarer and rarer, but that begs the question, will we see a new surge of this type of coaster, or will they die out completely? Before we can answer that question, it's important to understand who would be building these new rides. There are tons of roller coaster manufacturers, but not very many of them have dipped their toes into the woody market. So I found every manufacturer that had built multiple wooden coasters in the last 50 years, and I'll go over all 10 of them here real quick. First, CCI, which has constructed rides like Boulder Dash and Megaphobia, but the company is defunct and obviously won't be building any more coasters. Din Corporation is defunct as well and has only built woodies that suck anyway. Now on to the Gravity Group. They're one of the biggest manufacturers in general and have built some of the best woodies on the planet like the Voyage and Ravine Flyer 2. They're still pumping out fantastic rides all over the world, and their future definitely looks bright. I'll talk a little bit more about their new innovations later. GCI is another one of the most popular manufacturers that's built some fantastic coasters. However, recently they've been debuting their new Titan track, which is hybrid track that's more steel than wood. I'll get into that more later, I promise, but GCI is another great manufacturer. Intamin's mostly made steel coasters over their history, but the woodies they've made have been hailed as some of the best and most innovative coasters in the world. El Toro, T-Express, Colossus, and Balder are the 4 prefabricated wooden coasters they've made, and they're all very highly regarded. However, Intamin hasn't built a Woody in about 15 years and look to be sticking strictly to steel coasters for now. PTC has made the most Woodies of any manufacturer, but they were all made over 50 years ago. The company isn't defunct, but they aren't making roller coasters anymore. RMC is arguably the best roller coaster manufacturer because even though they haven't built a ton of rides, the ones they have made are among the world's best. They made 4 wooden coasters with their topper track design, but now seem to be sticking to hybrid coasters and single rails. Custom Woodies are no longer on their website. RCCA is another company that's gone defunct, but because all of the coasters they've made are absolute shit. Both SNS and Vekoma have made a few wooden coasters in the past, but now we're only working with steel, which is good since their Woodies are just meh. So to sum all that up, Gravity Group and GCI are really the only manufacturers that are currently building wooden coasters. Of course, there's always the possibility that a new manufacturer enters the scene or an existing one starts experimenting with wood, but for now it looks pretty grim. This is made worse by the fact that GCI seems to be turning a bit to steel, most notably with their new Titan track. In case you don't know about this, Titan track is hybrid track where the wood is encased in steel to create a smoother ride experience. It's kind of a mix between RMC's iBox track and their topper track, and GCI's already applied Titan track on sections of a lot of their old coasters. Zambezi Zinger is opening in 2023, and it'll use Titan track on some of it. However, I don't believe that GCI is ready to make the full jump to hybrid track. Only the spiral lift hill and one turn on Zambezi Zinger will be Titan track, and like I mentioned, only parts of old Woodies have been replaced, not the whole coaster. If GCI switched fully to Titan track or steel or whatever they're calling it, it'll be pretty far down the road from now. Recently, they've been putting out lots of new wooden coasters with 10 in the past 5 years. Whether or not they move to hybrids or stick with wood for their new coasters, the future of GCI is definitely bright. Now let's move on to prefabricated wooden coasters. I learned a ton about prefabs from El Toro Ryan's Problematic Coasters video on the model, and I highly recommend that you check it out. Unlike most Woodies, which are cut and shaped on site, prefabs act like steel coasters in that the pieces are made in a factory and then connected together at the park. Like I mentioned, Intamin has made 4 prefabs from 2001 to 2008. Now Gravity Group has adopted this strategy, advertising pre-cut track on their website. According to them, the Gravity Group will be able to retrack certain rides with their pre-cut track, as well as use it for new coasters. They've already retracked a small portion of Racer at Kings Island and a larger part of the Beast at Kings Island as well. Both portions have been extremely well received, and this innovation looks to be successful moving forward. However, there seems to be a bit of a problem with prefabricated wooden coasters. Going back to Intamin, they constructed 4, Colossus in 2001, Balder in 2003, El Toro in 2006, and T-Express in 2008. In 2016, Colossus closed for an extended refurbishment due to the track rotting. This was largely due to the park failing to maintain it properly, even though Intamin advertised their prefabs as mostly maintenance-free, so an error on both the part of the park and Intamin. It was completely retracked and opened 3 years later in 2019. In 2021, the same thing happened to Balder. Staff noticed a problem with the track, and it's currently undergoing a massive refurbishment. I haven't been able to find anything in particular about this, but I assume it's similar to what happened with Colossus. Of course, El Toro's been all over the news with its accidents recently. In 2021, the ride derailed and was closed for the rest of the season. It was intensively retracked and opened back this year. However, it suffered another accident a few weeks ago, injuring the riders on the train. Not much is known about the second accident, though. I don't think these accidents had anything to do with the track rotting, as I had heard that Six Flags Great Adventure takes great care of El Toro and retracts sections of it often. However, it's another problem with another coaster of this type. T-Express was built last, and although it hasn't had any major problems as of yet, it makes you think a little bit that something could happen with it. Obviously, there's lots of other factors like maintenance, stress on the track, climate, and other factors as well, but for the most part, the Intamin prefabs have been very problematic. This brings me back to Gravity Group's pre-cut track. Whether or not it's the same in material and construction as Intamin's, I'm not sure. The concept may look good on paper, but it remains to be seen if Gravity Group's prefabricated track will undergo the same problems as Intamin's. From the few things they've put out on YouTube and their website, it appears similar in construction and design, but technology has definitely advanced a lot since the 2000s. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it turns out. Another thing that Gravity Group's been very vocal about in regards to their prefabricated track is that it's economical. Intamin's prefabs have been known to be expensive, and I mean really expensive. One of the best things about wooden coasters is how cheap they are. By nature, wood is much cheaper than steel, and therefore coasters using wood tend to cost much less. Some of the biggest woodies in the world cost around $10 million, whereas the largest steelies can cost upwards of $30 million. But Intamin prefabs cost around as much as steel coasters do. El Toro and T-Express have been reported to have been bought for around $25 million. If Gravity Group is able to make these prefabs at a much more affordable cost, we could see a ton of these popping up all around the world. Of course, another big player in this game is RMC, but not in the way you'd think. If you're familiar with RMC, they're known throughout the community by taking old, shitty wooden coasters and converting them into masterful hybrids. It's different from a Titan Track retrack in that RMC will do a full conversion of the coaster, changing the layout entirely while still using the old structure. So RMC is a big part of this, not because they're making woodies, but because of how they're taking them away. However, a year or so ago, RMC unveiled their 208 retrack. This is based on their iBox track and yet another option for retracking old rough wooden coasters. I'm not exactly sure how the 208 retrack is made, but it seems to be a mix of their topper track and iBox. Some of this was applied on Timber Terror and Tremors at Silverwood, and although there aren't that many reports on it, the partial retrack seems to be largely positive. So now with GCI, Gravity Group, and RMC all offering options to fix up old woodies, it certainly appears that both parks and manufacturers are interested in ensuring the longevity of wooden coasters. RMC is still sticking to iBox steel when it comes to making new rides, but they're definitely paying attention to retracks as well. So to kind of sum this whole video up, I don't think we're going to see an end to wooden coasters. They're certainly going to become rarer and rarer, but I'm confident that they won't go away completely. I have to admit, though, that it is concerning how right now there are only 2 companies making woodies on a consistent basis. In fact, since the last RMC Woody Wildfire opened in 2016, GCI and Gravity Group have made every single wooden coaster since then. Whether any more manufacturers begin to make this type of ride remains to be seen, but I'm pretty sure that wooden coasters aren't going anywhere, at least for the near future. These same manufacturers are also concerned with ensuring that old woodies are retracked efficiently so that they last for a long time. Of course, further and further down the road, there might be a point when the industry switches completely to steel, but that won't be for a while. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. I spent a pretty long time researching, writing, recording, and editing, so a like and a subscription would be much appreciated. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and make sure to stay tuned to the channel for more coaster content. Goodbye.